This happened a long time ago. I would say this happened when I was around 8, so 11 years ago. My family and I were on holiday in Spain, in a city close to Barcelona. We went to a very big and luxurious resort with a ton of sports fields. From basketball to soccer, it took up a lot of space and it had tall fences around the perimeter to make sure that no one could get in at night. To give you some perspective, I think they had around 8 soccer fields, 4 basketball courts, 2 rugby fields, and probably some more. During the day, all the fields were full of people playing sports and it was always a ton of fun there. But at night, the perimeter closes. I stayed late with a friend. I don't remember his name, so we'll call him Brian. So Brian and I didn't want to go home yet, so we stayed a little bit longer to shoot penalties on the soccer field. Eventually, they had closed the fence, but since we were too far away for them to see us and vice versa, we only found out that the fence was closed when we had tried to leave. This was already scary. It was a huge, unlit place in a foreign country surrounded by big fences. After freaking out for a little bit, we decided that we didn't want to get in trouble, so we set out to follow the fence to look for holes through which we could escape instead of calling for help. After a solid 20 minutes, we found a hole, but it wasn't connected to the resort but to a dark forest instead. We figured it was in a large forest and that it would be safe given it's right next to the resort. We go through the hole and start crossing the forest. A mere 5 minutes later, we enter a large bare spot with an old, damaged, graffitied concrete shed. We avoided it the best that we could, but soon we heard some glass bottles moving around in the shed. Out walks this man, and he stares at us for 10 seconds as we are paralyzed by fear. He looked very deranged, probably had been homeless for a larger part of his life. His clothes were ripped, hair and beard very long and disgusting. He even had a limp. He coughs, which wakes up another man in the shed. This man looks exactly like Charles Padishik from Breaking Bad. They start to slowly walk in our direction, talking to us in Spanish. We slowly back up. They see this and they charge, and they start running, screaming and throwing stuff at us. We are running for our lives, and the forest is pitch black. We can barely see ahead of us, let alone see if there's an end to this seemingly infinite forest. After about 10 minutes of running, we reached the edge of the forest. We were on a small town road next to a huge cliff. No houses, no people, still being chased. We follow the road uphill, finally gaining some ground on the homeless Psychopath. The road ends. The only thing we see is a mansion without any burning lights. We figure that it's all or nothing, and we climb their gate and hide in their backyard. The homeless men follow us, but by the time they manage to get in, we were already hidden in some dense, dark bushes. They made quite a bit of noise, which woke up the residents, and out comes a man screaming and looking around his garden. He closely passes us but doesn't see us. He was holding a gun. Didn't get a close look, but I think that it was a shotgun, an older one that holds 2 shells. He inevitably spots the homeless man and fires a warning shot into the air. The Charles Padishik-looking man charges him but gets knocked down. He forces the homeless man out of his garden at gunpoint. We felt safe for a second until we realized that we were in a shotgun-wielding man's garden, and that we didn't know where the homeless men were. And we wait a little bit to be sure that the man is asleep, and that the homeless men have left. When we leave, think around 30 minutes later, the men are gone and the roads are quiet. We follow the same road, but now downhill and run into a small town. And we still have no idea where we are. It has been 3 hours since we left the resort, and we finally realize what just happened and we freak out. After walking for 10 or 15 minutes, we see a house with people in the living room. We ring the bell and try to ask the way. Most Spanish people don't speak Dutch, and we didn't really speak English, so it didn't go too well. We told her the name of the resort and she points downhill. This seems like a fairly standard road. We stick closely to the houses and follow the road. I didn't know this at the time, but apparently there is an abandoned slaughterhouse close to the entrance of the resort. We heard Dutch voices from somewhere around the building, so we go in to ask directions. Enter a bloody hellhole. Everywhere is blood. On the floor, on the walls, on the equipment, and even the ceiling. There are knives everywhere. Wasn't the best experience. The other people run into us and we ask directions, and it's a 2-minute walk away. And when we finally get to the resort, the staff doesn't let us in because they don't know if we're residents of the resort. They make us tell them the houses of our parents to come and get us. There were still pancakes left when I got back, and I played Pokemon with my brother. My mom gave me 10 euros for the arcade the next day, which is when my bike got stolen. So, to preface, I would like to state that this story is probably going to read like the plot of a campy 1980s horror novel, and it's going to be very long. However, this entire story is true. If not for being 5 miles from cell reception, and the way that the story ends, there would be a police report for verification. I will be changing names, locations, and some details in order to protect the privacy of the innocent. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend. We chose a fairly remote location that we had been to the previous weekend. The previous weekend, we were the only people we had seen within 1 mile of our campsite. Friday night, we got there and set up. This story takes place on Saturday night. It's about 9 p.m., so the sun is long gone, and the moon hasn't quite risen yet. It's pitch black out, other than what our fire lights up. Suddenly, we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first, we were hoping that it was someone drunk and having a little bit too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious that this isn't a fun party screaming. It isn't even like he hurts. It sounds full of despair, anger, and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that this is at 9 p.m., pitch black night in the middle of nowhere woods, 5 miles from the nearest cell phone signal. We hadn't seen anyone in hours. The screaming continues for what felt like hours, but was probably only around 5 solid minutes. We had no idea what to make of it, and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon, and tried to come up with explanations on the screaming, while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and lantern slowly enter our camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic, "How's it going?" before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly but flatly by asking if we could do him a favor. "Well, that depends on the favor," my buddy and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out for a second by the fire. Given the 2 of us and 1 of him, plus our myriad of weapons gathered from around camp to within our arm's reach, we decided to agree and let him hang out. After a short second of awkward silence, I ask him what the heck is going on. He proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy, and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. "Wait, what?" I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. "Was that the screaming that we had earlier?" The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and he begins his story. "We were just hanging out, man. We came up earlier today and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming and he wouldn't stop. And then he attacked me. He lunged at me. I told him to back off and chill, Well, they kept coming after me and it started getting pretty violent. And I'm pretty sure that he was going to kill me, so I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and I ran. I don't know what to do, man. He chased me when I ran. I don't know what to do. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet. My buddy and I took a look at each other for a second, completely astonished. And then something horrible dawned on me. Wait, he chased you. Like he's on his way here right now. The man just slowly nods in reply, and right on cue, like some terrible horror movie come to life, we hear screaming from maybe 30 to 40 feet away from our camp, down on the main trail. I just want your balance, Gary. I want your balance, Gary. Gary, where are you? Gary. I had never in my life heard a man scream like this. I had never heard anything like this in my life. It was a brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad. And the way that he said the stranger's name, it would switch erratically from long and sing-songy to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent, and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp and continued walking down the trail, screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with who we'll call Gary for hours, listening to these screaming getting further and further. Come to find out, they had taken 4 to 5 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we'll call Ty, was a coworker of his, and he was fine for 3.5 hours. And then he suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Ty thought he could kill Gary and steal his good trip. We heard the screams get further and further for over 2 hours. By this time, it's 11 p.m. and the moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Ty had no jacket or flashlight, according to Gary. My buddy and I were way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service, and it was snowy and icy, and required 2 to 3 miles of highway driving after getting off the trail. And Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of weed and mushrooms, though he couldn't drive either. We had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope that he sobered up, and he could find his way back. And he did. Well, he did, right into our camp. We hear yelling after about an hour of no screams, maybe 30 to 50 feet from camp again. Hey, help, please help me, I'm lost. And we can tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. And we tell Gary to hide just in case and greet the man with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my 40 cal pistol holstered. My buddy carrying his AK-47 style rifle and his 2 9mm Glocks holstered. And with our flashlights on our brightest settings in his face. He was about 6'2" or 6'3" and approximately 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided that he was calm enough to walk with, and walked him back to his camp. He seemed really remorseful, said that he blacked out and didn't remember anything, and he had a falling out with his buddy. We escorted him back to his camp down the trail, returned and told Gary that Ty seemed cool, and if anything else happened, to scream and come running. We would come out and help him out. It ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary, and got his phone number to make sure that the next day he got back into town safely, and back to his wife and kid, and we're actually planning a camping trip with him soon. But Ty, who wandered screaming like a deranged maniac into the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet, to murder your friend to steal his good trip, or whatever it is your psychosis-filled mind was thinking. For the love of God, I don't want to meet you again. So, this is going to be hard for 2 reasons. 1, I've never talked about this with anyone before, and 2, this thing that happened was the worst event in my entire life, so it's a bit complicated. All of this was very quick, and I still have no idea why that happened. Anyway, my name is Matthew, I'm 16 years old, and I live in Italy. My house is in a little village in the mountains near the Mont Blanc, the biggest mountain in Europe. Useless to say that there isn't much activity around here during the day. A very small amount of cars pass by, and there's usually no people around. It's a very calm and cool place at the end. The event took place last April. I had just gotten out of my school after a 2-hour-long Latin test, and I was basically already sleeping at that point. I unlocked my bike, waved to my friends and left, taking the main road that led to the village that I live in. As always, there were no cars, no people, no nothing. I was tired, and while riding, I was thinking about the usual things a 15-year-old thinks when coming back from school. The should I do the homework first or play video games kind of stuff. I was probably overthinking and kept going long on the road without realizing that I didn't take the right turn. I noticed my mistake a few minutes later and thought, never mind, I'll just take the long way. Because at the end of the road, you could take a path that led to the village. I didn't know that yet, but that was probably the worst mistake that I've made in my entire life. I kept going, and at that point, the road was going through a little forest. All the trees above me were stopping the already small amount of sunlight that there was, so it was basically nighttime. I turned down the bike's flashlight and moved onto the right side of the road. Everything was quiet, until I heard the sound of a car coming towards me. I was a bit surprised because, as I'd already said, there is basically no traffic in the area, specifically at that time of the day too. I didn't panic after all, it was only a car passing by. After a while, the sound approached and I saw the headlights coming from the road. The car was still pretty far away and going at a slow pace, like if the driver was looking for something. But then the car sped up and, at my surprise, turned right to get in front of me. Confused and not wanting to get hit by the vehicle, I turned left to bring the bike onto the other side of the road. The car did the same and it sped up even more. I had very little time to realize what was happening, because the car was coming at a full speed towards me, and I was about to get hit. So I did the first thing that came to mind, and I jumped off my bike on the right side of the road. I did that just in time because the car ran over the empty bike just a few seconds after. I sat on the asphalt, my knees and elbows burning from the fall, trying to realize what had just happened. When I saw the driver of the car getting out of the vehicle, that was now still on the side of the road, running towards me without saying a word. I got up as fast as I could, but the guy managed to grab a hold of my left arm. I screamed, turned around, and landed the strongest punch that I ever could possibly take on the man's nose. The guy didn't flinch. He let go of my arm, touched his now bleeding nose, and he smiled at me, before running back into the car, starting the engine again, and leaving. I was in complete shock. I grabbed what was left of my bike and ran home as fast as I could. I was so scared that I left my backpack in the middle of the road and went back to get it the next day. That's pretty much it for the story. I never knew who this guy was and why he tried to run me over with his car. This is my biggest and really the only trauma that I've experienced in all of my life. I can tell you that I will never take that road again.